Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. It's busy days here as we are also covering the American Championship Cyclocross today, the day after they happened. And it's a full house here with me to discuss that. From the Netherlands is Issam.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And joining me from Louisville is Patrick, who you might remember from the European Championships podcast. Patrick, thank you for being here.
Hey Noah.
So first, to answer a couple of questions, why are we covering the American Championship Cyclocross? Well, after Cabras being cancelled, we certainly missed it, so we enjoyed it, we watched the races. Lots of our listeners are American, about 1/3 of our listeners are actually American, so we thought we should give that some attention, and since Patrick was on the ground, it would be a waste to not use any of his intel and interviews, so that's why we're doing it. So Patrick, you're in Louisville. It's quite the venue with some American cyclocross history there nowadays, right?
I'm here in Louisville, Kentucky, home of the 2024 United States Cyclocross National Championships. Louisville, in the last decade or so, has become somewhat synonymous with championship cyclocross in North America. It first showed up in the scene in 2013 as the first World Championships to leave Europe. That race was located in Eva Bandman Park. There were some issues there with flooding of the river, and the race was ultimately compressed down into one day, which yielded them to look for a different venue across town. Since 2017, the racing has now been located in Joe Creason Park. 2017, the park hosted the Pan Am Championships, and then in 2018, hosted the first of the USA Cycling National Championships in that venue. It subsequently went on to host the USA Cycling National Championships last year in 2023, and again this year in 2024.
And what can you tell us about the course, Patrick? Because last year the course looked quite different than it was today, and that was not only down to the weather.
The course has somewhat evolved since 2018. 2018 was a relatively muddy year, and the course was relatively difficult. Combine those two things, and they essentially lost control of the course. There was some considerations that it might be too dangerous. There were a number of people that got injured, and ultimately the course was just far too hard for the vast majority of riders at that juncture. So coming into 2023, we saw a much more benign course. A lot of the features were taken out. A lot of the climbing was taken out, and the course was, a little bit too easy given the conditions on the day, which ended up being relatively dry. So we saw fast racing last year, and ultimately not quite the challenge that USA Cycling was looking for their national championship. Come 2024, seeing kind of the middle ground between the two races. So 2018 was a bit too hard, 2023 was a bit too easy, and 2024 hoped to be kind of in the middle. The forecast this week had been for dry weather throughout the racing on Saturday. That did come true. The course it varied throughout the day as the temperatures changed, as it warmed up throughout the afternoon, and ultimately as it cooled down at night. There was quite a bit more elevation gain in this year's course. Last year was relatively flat. They only used the lower bowl a little bit for the elite races. But this year we saw the riders go a little bit lower down in that bowl, a little bit more climbing, a little bit more up and down reps. And you'll hear from some riders later that commented on that it made the course a little bit more dynamic. So 2024 kind of was set up to be a good year. It was hoping to be the sweet spot between the different courses that we saw in Louisville. And ultimately, I think it yielded some pretty good racing throughout the day.
Let's go to the racing then. Let's start with the Men Elite Championships. Issam and I enjoyed watching that stream quite a lot. It was a very hard battle. It was a dogfight for the title, three-way battle. What were your observations going into the race?
So coming into the last race of the day, the Men's Elite National Championship, it was really a question of, was Eric Bruner going to be able to take his third jersey in 4 years? Or was a new rider going to kind of step in and take that jersey off his shoulders? The prevailing wisdom was that Andrew Strohmeyer had a good opportunity here to take the win. Earlier in the day, the course was a bit muddy, especially during the U23 races. So during the junior race, it was still pretty frozen, pretty hard. It thawed during the U23 races, got a bit muddy. That mud was a bit sticky, was kind of staying on tire, it was kind of getting stuck on frames. But then into the elite races, we started seeing it dry out, and that mud kind of didn't really bring a factor to the race anymore. I mean, it was getting pretty fast. There were parts that were a little stickier than others, but for the most part, there were well-defined ruts. The mud wasn't sticking to too much. You didn't see riders with mud on their faces at all. So it was really, what could be considered a dry race, at least for what we can say in December in the Midwest of the United States.
So, Patrick, you were, of course, on the ground. We watched on the stream. For you, how did that race pan out? Could you give us a short summary?
So, race started and really progressed on with 5 riders within touching distance of the front, and really that whittled down to 3 as the race went on. So it was Funston, Eric Bruner, Strohmeyer, and then earlier on, Kerry Werner and Curtis White were able to hang on to the front pack. Those two, though, later on in the race got distance off. We were really left with the 3-up race between Funston, Bruner, and Strohmeyer through largely the last 2/3 of the race. So there was really not much in them. They all kind of provided attacks to each other, some stronger than others, but no one really ever got much of a gap. And it was really a lot like a road race in some ways. They traded positions. You see Bruner in his really low position, relatively aero, but that position seems to kind of lead to mistakes from him. So you saw him hit the deck twice. You saw him in the lead one time with his front wheel wash out that kind of put him to the back of the group. So harder for him to kind of keep momentum and stay at the front because he was having little mistakes here and there and offering the other 2 opportunities to get into the front. So into that last lap, you see Bruner kind of leading, but it didn't really feel, honestly, like he was going to take it. It felt like he didn't have the momentum on his side. And frankly, Funston or Strohmeyer really had it on their side, it seemed. We were traded then to essentially what ended up being a 3-up sprint to finish the race. You saw Strohmeyer lead it out. Bruner was in second. Funston was in third. Funston really kind of sat up early, so it was really down to a 2-up sprint once we really got into it. Strohmeyer never really gave Bruner an opportunity to come around. He had the gap from the beginning. He let it out, and he held it.
So, Issam, we watched that fight for the title on the stream, and it was a great race. At least that's how I feel about it. Because you know how in Belgian races we often get these top 3 riders or top 4 riders getting away early in the race and they sit in? This was completely the opposite, because already in the second lap, Funston and Strohmeyer, they were racing as if they were prime Mario de Klerk taking on Sven Nys or Erwin Vervecke in the final lap for a world title. That was some dogfighting going on there. That was a cage fight. It was just all out, every corner, white lines, switchbacks, side by side, shoulder rubbings, and Bruner was kind of just sitting in the back waiting for his moment. And I thought that was a very interesting observation. Strohmeyer made a super nervous impression to me. He said afterwards that he didn't really have a race plan. It kind of seemed visible there because he seemed hyper-focused on getting in the head of people, pretending to overtake, and super nervous impression. At least that's how it looked on the stream.
He definitely was nervous, or at least it seems to be that way. I think that he was trying to be ahead, or at least in second, and as you said, he was really in his head. He was really, a lot was going in terms of trying to get in the head of the others, of the competitors, and he wanted to show that he was there, that he has good legs, and that he is someone that doesn't want to be played with. And I can understand it in a way. I think that he wanted to take the title, and I think that despite it not being the most tactical way of doing it, he could have played that race in a lot of different ways, and I think that he could have won it in a lot of different ways, but he won it in a way that was quite spectacular, I have to say. And it was, for me as a viewer on it, watching it on the screen, it was great to watch. I think that if he had a plan, it would have been a little bit better. I think that also, if you go into that mentally, it maybe gives you a little bit more rest. But it reminded me a little bit of some of those junior races that I have seen, because there was, it was from corner to corner from time to time that they were battling over-under dive bombs, going side by side, rubbing the shoulder. It was a great battle, and it was great to see. And I think that the tactics were thrown out in a way, but in the end, Strohmeyer, I think that sprint in the end on the final stretch was so clear in a way. The way he rode from the rest, how explosive he still was there. If you would have seen that elites in Belgium, or at least in Europe, most of the time, if you have such a sprint, you wait it out. You sit in the second wheel, you try to be in the front in the last corner, or you pick a decisive moment where you try to put someone under pressure on the last lap. But he didn't make that decision. But there was nothing wrong with that, because in the end, he was the winner, and it was a great watch.
Of course, the winner is always right, and I don't want to be overly critical on Strohmeyer, so let me also start by saying something positive. He showed good adaptability, because in the first lap he was trying to ride the stairs, he made it up, but that didn't work. His adaptability throughout the race was good, because he stopped doing that. However, not having a race plan like this, unpreparedness, indecisiveness, that can cost your races at the highest level. It could have cost him here. It didn't cost him here in the end, but if you do this in a World Cup, you're toast, or even in an Exactcross. And especially what you mentioned about that final lap, Issam, is why it's critical that he did have a plan, because he should have learned from the book of Mario de Klerk. He should have just stayed calm, stay in the wheels. What he did in the final lap was good. In the final lap, he took the lead for the technical section, applied some pressure but didn't go too crazy, made sure that if he made a mistake, it went at the cost of others and not at his own cost, and then he finished it off in the sprint. I think he could have made his life a lot easier if he hadn't been that involved in the jockeying for positions. That costs a lot of energy, but overall, I would argue he is the deserved champion also if you base it on this season, and he's kind of the coming man for American cyclocross, so that's all good. But the race could have also panned out very differently, because Eric Brunner, he did have potential to win the race, and he kind of gave it away. So early on in the race, Brunner crashed on the barriers. He needed to put his chain back on and then chased. That was when Strohmeyer attacked the first time. And from there on, Brunner managed to come back. There was a lot of fighting for position. Then in the penultimate lap, Brunner kind of did what he had to do. This was the only way he was going to get rid of Strohmeyer, was force Funston between himself and Strohmeyer. And he did that in the technical section. Funston was under pressure, made a mistake. Brunner had a 4-second gap. And then he crashed, which was a silly crash. It looked like he hit a root or something. And from there on, Brunner was the one who messed up, because in the final lap, he was too late trying to get into the wheel of Strohmeyer. He wasn't leading through the technical stuff, and he never really featured anymore. He was too caught up fighting for position with Funston to be involved with fighting for the title with Strohmeyer. So, of course, it was a great race, and I think there's cases to make that both Brunner and Strohmeyer didn't execute perfectly. That's also what made it a good race. But one thing I have to ask you. Brunner, what aero benefits was he trying to take?
What is that? No, but I mean, that aero positioning that he was trying to hold or maintain when he was trying to put pressure, on the pedals and really get going, it looked a bit hideous, to be honest. Probably, I think the first time we have seen a arrow trying to be used, an arrow position in cyclocross. I think that it is unique in a way, but it also looked hideous, and I don't know how much it helped. There is this thing, obviously, that you can create a little bit more power if you sit on the pedal. That's sometimes something that's being said, because you spend more energy if you're standing on the pedals, but I don't know about this. This was a bit, maybe a little bit too much. It worked out in a way, because he was going up the climbs quite fast, and it looked hideous, but it went fast. I don't think that was the reason why he lost, though. I think that mainly that mistake, the crash that he had there, or the knee fall in a way, was just, that was a bit bad. And from there on, last lap, the momentum just never came his way. It was all Strohmeyer in the last lap, and He even had to look a little bit more behind than he had to look ahead, and I think that was just not the best for him. And from there on, at the end of it, I think that for Brunner, when he went to the final stretch and Strohmeyer sprinted the way he did, I think for him it was it was clear that even with everything that happened, if it would have stayed together, he wouldn't have won. So in the end, I think he could be happy with the race. He fought very hard in the end, but it was just not enough. And I think that second is not a terrible position to be in. He won the Pan Am, so he can be relatively satisfied with it, with this season so far.
And he's going to go to Europe now, so I am curious to see how he will do there. We've been talking for a while now. Patrick, what was your takeaway from Strohmeyer's win?
So, good win here by Strohmeyer. The course shaped up for him, right? If it was a more wet day, if the mud was a little tackier, if it was a little more tricky in conditions, then it might not have really set up for him. But he couldn't ask for something better. It was fast. It really played into his strengths, and in that way, he, one, got lucky, but two, was able to take advantage, and that's good for him. A strong showing. Brunner wasn't able to come around. He wasn't able to get that third national championship. It'll be interesting to see what he does in the future. I don't know if we're going to continue to see him racing all that much, but it'll be interesting. Strohmeyer has an opportunity here to hold the jersey for a few years. We see riders that are up and coming that are probably going to challenge for it in the next 2-3 seasons. But Strohmeyer's got a chance here. No one really, since Stephen Hyde, really has had an opportunity to keep it and hold it for a while. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, good point about the weather. We saw, as you mentioned, some changeable conditions throughout the day, and if it had been more muddier, it would have been a bit easier to see potentially Scott Funston win, because he is a rider in the past that we've seen do relatively well on the more muddy courses. Also over here in Europe, last year, for instance, he was 29th in Gavere, which was a decent result if you compare that to the faster races that he's done over here. So I think that's definitely something worth factoring in. But of course, you can only race the course you get. So let's look at the entire top 10. Behind Strohmeyer, we find Brunner and Funston. 4th place went to Curtis White ahead of Kerry Werner. 6th place to Jules van Kempen ahead of Caleb Swartz. Owen Brenneman in 8th, Dylan McNeil in 9th, and then Cade Bickmore rounded out the top 10 here. I think a few takeaways is that there's a couple of younger riders breaking into the top 10 here. So then I mean Jules van Kempen, 6th place, also Owen Brenneman and Dylan McNeils. They are all first or second year elites, and I would argue that it's something positive. We've talked before about there kind of being an age gap in the US, that it's hard to retain riders. So the question is, how do these riders develop? Are they able to stick in these races and be like proper level, not necessarily fillers, but riders that can consistently compete for top 10s here? Or do they, like many others, eventually get drawn to just the normal life? They complete college, they need to get a job, it's not for them to become a bike racer. It's hard. Like, cyclocross is not a big sport globally. It's not easy to make money in there, especially outside of the Netherlands and Belgium. So it's a tricky situation. Issam, we had Curtis White and Kerry Werner, 4th and 5th. Those two riders were kind of jockeying it out there with each other. White looked somewhat close to rejoining the leaders in the front, but ultimately these two riders didn't really appear to have it on the day. They lacked just a bit of power compared to the three others.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I think that White on the last lap showed some promise, and he was getting closer, but I think that also kind of had to do with the three up front kind of looking to each other and trying to save every single energy that they still somewhat had from the racing that they did, and try to position themselves for the last lap. And I think White, because of that, was able to close a little bit. He was also getting maybe a little better into the race, but the moment the three up front tried to attack each other and race for victory, I think from there on it was it was kind of game over for White in terms of trying to find some connection with the guys up front. And I think for both White and Werner, they kind of were in this situation where they had to chase for the entirety of the race, and in the end, I think with just falling outside of the podium, it was the maximum in the end. They didn't really have much more in them, at least from what I saw. It looked like they just didn't have enough to be in the fight for the podium, and they had to settle for 4th and 5th, which wasn't a terrible result, but it is what it is, and they were not able to fight for the podium.
Then let's go to the women's race. We were expecting a pretty big battle between Vida Lopez de San Roman and Katie Klaus in this race. Patrick, what were your expectations coming into this race?
These were two of the most wide open elite races that we've seen in a number of years. With Clara Hansinger retiring, and then just kind of the parity that we see over on the men's side, we had a good opportunity here to crown 2 national championships at the elite level that were riders that haven't had those wins before. So it was pretty exciting coming into the races today. It was kind of a 2-up race, in my opinion, at the start. So you knew Klaus was on decent form. She's been there before, 2nd place last year. She's kind of the mainstay on the calendar at this point, at this level. But then you have a newcomer. You have Vida Lopez de San Roman showing up out of the junior category, foregoing the U23s and going straight to elite. So it was a question of, is Vida going to perform to the extent that we know she can? And is Klaus going to be able to kind of rise to the level? Because I think coming into the season, there was some expectation that this year might have been a down year. It might be the year for Klaus to take a win on a relatively smaller, less developed field. But now you have Vida showing up and kind of forcing the issue, saying, hey, like, we're gonna race this and we're gonna see what happens.
So, Issam, we've covered Vida Lopez de San Roman quite a bit. Last year she appeared as a guest on our podcast as well. She raced the elite category. We'll come to the results. She won, so it's obviously the right decision. Lizzie Gonzalez also raced up. She was last year's U23 champion. What do you think about their decision? Like, could you get behind their decision to race up coming into the race?
Well, yeah, difficult. I mean, in a way, obviously, it is. If you feel like you're able to do it, then you definitely should go for it. And I guess in the end, it showed that it was well within the possibilities. But it's a tricky thing, because in terms of development, you want to go through all the stages of the categories and build it up. You don't want to rush it. But I think that the opportunity was just there, and when it's there, you just have to take it in a way. And I think that you will regret it if, for whatever reason, you were not able to do it in a later stage in your career. So if you got the opportunity to win an elite title, if it's the smallest of opportunities, you have to go for it. And I think there was a realistic chance for her to at least get on the podium and even fight for victory. And it's a bit it's a bit in between. You could go for that decision, but it takes some courage, and it takes some thought to come to that decision. But in the end, we know how it played out, and it worked out wonders. So who am I in the end to to doubt the decision, because it all played out great for her.
So I admire riders who show the courage to race up. If you recall back to the 2023 World Championships in Hoogheide, I was quite profound in thinking that Van Anrooy should have raced the elite race rather than the U23 race, because you simply never know when you get another chance. Of course, the stakes at national championships are lower. You can revert back. This has no consequence for the World Championships category. But especially for Lopez de San Roman, I could fully understand it. I mean, her cross season started late, but she immediately took 2 wins, beating Mani, who's been one of the better riders. For Gonzalez, you could make a bit of a different case. So, how has she really done? But I also think it makes sense for her, because she's the champion of last year. So what does she really have to gain by winning another U23 title? It's nice, but you can never wear that jersey. So trying to win a medal here makes sense. She had some good performances in Cincinnati and in Falmouth this year, so based on those results, I could definitely see why she made the choice. She didn't really have the form here, but in the end, Patrick, you can tell us how that race went down, because also this one, it came down till the final lap.
Right off the bat, you see Vida, Katie Klaus, Raylan Nuss, and Natalie Quinn really break it up. Lizzie Gonzalez was in there for a little bit of time. She kind of fell off the pace early on. So really you're left with those four fighting it out. Within a lap or two, it really became kind of two-person packs. So you had Lopez de San Ramon, you had Katie Klaus kind of ahead of Raylan Nuss and Natalie Quinn. Vida and Katie took it all the way to the last lap. And into that last lap, they were kind of playing games with each other. They were pacing. No one really wanted to lead. There were a few little false attacks in there that never really went anywhere. You saw Vida at one point take a wide line on a downhill, and Klaus dive bombed her. It was really to no avail. It really didn't gain too much. It just kind of put her in the front. So there wasn't much between them. And coming into the last 3/4 of the lap, it was a question of, was someone going to make a move or was someone going to start to falter? Into that last lap, you started seeing some issues, though, on Klaus's side. She was looking a little gashed. She was looking a little uncomfortable. And right after you started seeing those indications, it was pretty clear that she was cramping. So at that point, Vida started riding away. With 3/4 of a lap left, I mean, they were together, but then at the finish, you see Vida taking a 1 minute and 5-second win over Klaus. So, the results didn't really portray the true story here. Klaus and Nuss finished close together when in reality, the race wasn't between the two of them. It was really between Lopez de San Ramon and Klaus.
So, Patrick, it was a bit of an anticlimactic ending here, with Klaus getting either big cramps or pulling a muscle, something in that region as they passed pit 1. But what was your takeaway from this race?
The big thing here to note is that Vida stepped up from the women's junior level straight up to women's elite, was the youngest winner of a cyclocross national championship in the history of the event, and took it pretty decisively. I mean, she rode a good race. Were there some mistakes early on? Sure, there were. I mean, did she let Klaus hang on a little longer? Did she pace her a little too much? I don't know. It's easy to armchair quarterback this and say she should have done all kinds of different things. But at the end of the day, she took a win. She took a very decisive win. And it's likely a jersey that she's going to hang on to here for a good amount of years.
So, Patrick, you say it's likely she will hold on to that jersey for a couple of years. We'll wait and see about that one, because there is more talent coming through, but it's a fact she is the youngest world champion. I know it's American and the NBA champions are the world champions, but we don't do that in cyclocross, luckily. The American champion, and well, we'll see what time brings. I thought she rode a smart race. Curious on your take, Issam, but she stayed calm. She kind of sat this one out, She was like, well, I'm kind of the underdog here. I don't know if that narrative was a bit forced, but it definitely worked out for her, right? So in the first lap, she didn't really care that all these other riders, Nuss, Gonzalez, Quinn, managed to come back and create a bigger leading group. She really put the pressure on Klaus. Klaus, you're going to dictate the tempo here. You're going to try and break the group up, which she also did. And I don't really think that was a major mistake by Klaus, because it is easier if you're away. And then I think she didn't pace too hard. You saw the lap times fluctuating a bit. Lopez de San Ramon mainly just sitting in the wheel. And then in the penultimate lap, she placed the attack. It definitely pushed Klaus to the limit, and then ultimately we don't know what would have happened, right? Cramps, pulled muscle, whatever. It's hard to know, but I would definitely have wanted to see that come down to the wire, see how it would have turned out. I think Lopez de San Ramon made a very good impression on me. That attack in the penultimate lap, it looked like she had Klaus on the ropes on that big climb towards the pit, and I don't know. I don't really want to speculate about the rest. It was just a special performance.
Yeah, it definitely was. I think something that I maybe underestimated when I was watching was just those sections uphill where she was, when Vida was really putting Klaus under pressure before the last lap. I was a bit. I would have loved to see her wait a little bit during the race. I thought that was maybe not tactically the best to do, but I think in the end that maybe helped her in a way in the last lap, because just because she put Klaus under some serious pressure. And I don't know if it was a muscle or a cramp or whatever it was. I think that, despite all that, I think that she was really under pressure on the last lap, and the face was turning a little bit. It was, I think that she really was feeling the pace of Vida, and, then at a certain point it's all hell breaks loose with the body, and, you cannot really control that in the end. But I think that Vida was a class above the rest. And a very deserving champion, and also someone that can maybe hold on to this title for a couple of years. But as you said, there is some talent coming up, which we will discuss. But it's great to see. I think it's for her a special moment as well, and it's going to be great to have that jersey, I guess, because of the races that will be held in Europe, and that's just going to be an experience of itself. And yeah, it's just, it was a great race to watch in the end, anticlimactic in the end, but still there was this good feel on the winner. And overall, I think that Klaus cannot really blame herself or something. I think she was just beaten by the better woman, and that was it. I think there was not much more to it. I think tactically she didn't do that much wrong. It was just down to getting beaten by someone that was just a little bit better, and that sometimes happens.
Let's listen at what she had to say herself after that victory, because Patrick had a quick interview with her right after the finish.
Vida Lopez de San Roman, last year you were the winner of the women's junior race. This year, women's elite. Very different conditions between the two races. Which would you prefer?
Oh gosh, I loved the conditions today, honestly. Like, it dried out a bit, and the course was running super fast, but I'm also definitely a rider who always does best in the mud, so I was kind of hoping for a little rain and a little mud, and there was kind of a little bit of both out there today, so I was really happy with the conditions.
Yeah, very different course.
Yeah.
So Alison Dunlap won this for 6 years, Katie Compton 15, Clara Hansinger another 4.
Yeah.
When women win this title, they tend to hang on to it for a long time. How long do you want to keep it?
Oh gosh, I don't know. That's a hard question. I'll keep going for it as long as I can.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Late start to the season for you.
Yeah.
Just a few race days prior to this weekend. Basically all wins for you. Are we going to see the Stars and Stripes in Europe for the Christmas period?
Yes, and I can't wait. It was definitely hard to start my cross season so late, but I had a super late mountain bike season. Then I also dabbled in a little bit of road. So I really took my time taking an off season and then really starting to get into things a bit later. But it really paid off, and I'm really looking forward to doing the first few World Cups over in Europe. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Vida.
Yeah, of course.
Let's also look at the entire top 10 here. Behind the podium of Lopez de San Roman and Katie Klaus, we find Raylan Nuss in third, so that's still on the podium. Then off the podium is Natalie Quinn, ahead of Lizzie Gonzalez, Anna McGill, Anna Drovinsky in 7th, Amelia Shee in 8th, Caitlin Bernstein in 9th, and Emily Shields completing the top 10. Issam, let's just briefly talk here a bit about Raylan Nuss. So she finishes third here. That is the same position where she finished last year. I've seen some people call this slightly surprising, but I don't know if I fully agree with that observation, because yes, based on the Pan American Championships, you could conclude such conclusions, but if you look at the entire season, you and I have both been a bit critical of Nuss in terms of performance and talked about that, but still, if we narrow it down to just the Americans in the results, for most of the season she has been the second or third American, and now with Lopez de San Roman in the equation, this is kind of where I would have expected her. She maybe looked a bit stronger, but as Patrick said, the time gaps don't really tell the full story here.
No, the time gaps definitely do not tell the full story. it looked better this race compared to how the racing was this season so far. It felt quite good. It looked good. The gap and the difference was somewhat there, and she never really played a role up front for first or second place. But I think that it was, in the end, it was somewhat within her reach, but it had to all work, and I think that in the end it did kind of work. She was able to finish strongly in the end, benefited from mistakes of others, and got herself in a podium position. And I think that in the end you cannot really say that it was undeserved or that unexpected. I think that it was within the line of expectations, but it had to work out. She had to have a good day. It needed to work out, and I think that it did in the end. And that's, in my eyes, how the podium position for her came to fruition. So I think in the end she can be happy to be standing on the podium again. That's pretty much it.
Then let's move to the women's U23 race. Patrick, who were the main protagonists in that race?
The women's U23 race shaped up to be one of the more exciting ones of the day. U23 can be a little bit interesting because you typically end up with some riders in the mix that you don't see out racing cross all that regularly. You see some road riders pop in, you see some collegiate mountain bikers pop in. The collegiate atmosphere that kind of leads into the weekend at Nationals drives some riders racing in the U23 level that you don't see on an everyday basis. So it's kind of interesting in that way. It's a little bit of a mix-up sometimes, and we really saw that here today. So our top three, Catherine Sarkisov, Makina Kellerman, Cassidy Hickey, both Kellerman and Hickey really didn't race a large cross schedule at all. Hickey raced really rad in the national championships. Kellerman raced just the national championships. So it's interesting to see that. It's interesting to see a podium made up of one racer that's racing cross regularly and two riders that are racing other disciplines but then are using the cross nationals as an opportunity to put on a Stars and Stripes jersey. So that's pretty interesting to see.
The race ultimately came down to quite a controversial sprint. Could you tell us a bit more, Patrick?
The race kind of stayed in a big group. So those three stayed together most of the race. And then coming into the line, you saw a bit of a 3-up sprint with Cassidy Hickey and Sarkisov really driving the pace down to the line. I made a joke that Jasper Philipsen might have been in Louisville this weekend. Cassidy Hickey really, came across her line, tried to block out Sarkisov, and ultimately got relegated after that crash that we saw at the finish line. One of the crazier finishes I've ever seen, to be honest. Haven't seen anything like that. But it was pretty blatant that Hickey, left her line, came across. It was kind of a road sprinting move. And it's unfortunate to see, but I think everything kind of turned out well. No one was really injured. So, just a little bit of skin at the finish line and that's that. There was a little bit of drama, though. At first, you saw Hickey get relegated from first back down to fourth. That gave Kaya Musgrave a third-place finish. That was a little bit of a strange decision from the commissaires. The three were together, and so to relegate Hickey one more position down to fourth, when fourth place was a little bit farther behind, was a little bit strange. It was an odd decision. Ultimately, we saw that choice get protested. So we saw a protest of a protest, and that was successful. So Hickey then was not relegated back to fourth. She was relegated back to third. So she kept her podium spot. Ultimately, we were left with Sarkisov taking the win, Kellerman taking second, and then Hickey taking third.
So, Issam, to me, this women's U23 race is the bodification of a championship. Championships create stress that is impossible to describe. At championships, so many more things go wrong in terms of crashes, in terms of bad days. And at the same time, it's also to a degree like every other race, but the stakes are just higher. If you have a mechanical and your race is ruined, it hurts a lot more because it's the championship, right? It's about being there on that day. But if you look here, two of the favorites, Vida Lopez de San Roman and Lizzie Gonzalez, race in the elite race. Lauren Zerner is left as top favorite, but she can't seize the day. She finishes 9th. Then Cassidy Hickey is the remaining rider. She is not a complete surprise. She finished 3rd at the National Championships last year. She only did 1 weekend of UCI racing this year. She was 6th and 7th in Falmouth at Really Rad. And she kind of had the racing control. She was pushing, but then another championship element comes in. There's always riders who you don't really expect. And I think that McKenna Kellerman is the other modification of that, because she's a rider. She's done 2 races. I've been told she's been put into cyclocross because her boyfriend Jack Spranger does that, and that this was one of her first, last year's Nationals was her first ever cyclocross race. She finished 6th. Now she's 3rd. She was in the mix. She was clearly inexperienced, but she seizes the day. She tries for everything. She's in the mix, doesn't really have it in the final lap. Hickey looks to have it in the bag, but then as she goes out of the pits, there's less than a quarter of a lap to go. Hickey crashes, and it's a 3-woman group again. And in that group is also Catherine Sarkisov, another dark horse. More people were understandably tipping Kaya Musgrave or Ella Brenneman or Mia Asseltine, but no, Sarkisov was there. She's done a bit more races this season. She didn't stand out as much as the other riders, but she also seized the day here. You can overperform. And then it comes down to the sprint. And also that sprint, which was highly controversial, is something that, the championships effect play in there, right? So Hickey is probably getting super nervous, shit, I screwed up. I need to win this. I'm a road rider. Surely I can win the sprint. But she comes out of the corner on the hoods, is sprinting, then feels that Sarkisov is coming alongside. Initially, I thought Sarkisov just completely got bolted by Hickey, who deviated, did a Stibar de Nieuwelare. That was my first reaction, good enough, welcome back Stibar de Nieuwelare. But then I looked in the replay, and you can kind of see, also on the pictures Patrick took, that the front wheel of Hickey gets lifted. Because she's sprinting on the hoods, she lifts her front wheel. It's turned at an angle because she's moving her upper body. It comes down pointing towards Sarkisov. Her rear wheel completely slides out as a reaction. They come together and they crash. That's my takeaway. What's your takeaway, Issam?
Well, in the beginning, I was also a bit skeptical because those things sometimes happen, and intention could not be always that bad, but sometimes it is. But I totally agree with your assessment. I think that in the end, you can really, if you look closely, you see the replay as well. You can just see that the front wheel was just lifted, and from there, I would say she wasn't a passenger, but it was kind of out of her control. That just happens. It's a sprint for the title, so you're gonna try and throw everything at it, and of course you're going to try to keep it clean. And I think that the intentions were there, but in the end it just went the way it went. And I don't think it was good that they didn't have any hard feelings. It was also good to see that the decisions were made in the end and that they were both on the podium. We shouldn't make it that big. It looked quite spectacular. I think that the best thing out of that is that they all came out relatively okay and unharmed. So that was probably the best thing out of the whole situation. And we got crowned a new champion. And in the end, they were both somewhat satisfied with it. Obviously, there's going to be some disappointment on one side, but overall, it was it was a great sprint. Just ended a bit worse than it should have had. And
I would still briefly like to comment on the relegation, because I think the final decision to relegate her to 3rd is the correct one. Relegating to 4th made no sense, because they were with a group coming onto the pavement, and you can say, okay, they were with 3, so you go to the last place of the group going onto the pavement. I kind of also would have understood if it was 2nd, but that's fine. The 4th would have made no sense to me, because, well, at that point, why don't you just completely disqualify her if you think it's that bad? As I said, I don't think it was intentional, and I don't think that should really play a role in the punishment. And the punishment well, maybe it should in terms of do we relegate or disqualify her, because if you say it's intentional, you can say, okay, full-on disqualification. I can see it from that extent, but for me, more important from a human perspective, like, even in the heat of the moment, if you deliberately take out somebody, that's really clearly crossing a line, and I don't think that was the case here. Patrick, did you see any other, like, what was your observation?
On the podium, it didn't seem like there was any hard feelings between the racers. It was a racing incident. I don't think anybody meant wrong. Everybody looked a little bit tired at that point, and things happen. Racing happens. So while it was a bad move, she did come across her line. She did deserve to be relegated back down to third. I don't think it was particularly intentional. I think the decision that was ultimately made to relegate Hickey back down to third was the right decision, and Sarkisov was the rightful winner. She had a good chance of coming around in that sprint without the deviation from Hickey. There was a good chance she would have won anyway. So, that podium there, the mix-up between second and third, not a big change in my opinion. And ultimately, the three people we saw on the podium in this race were the three rightful podium placers.
What we didn't really mention so far was that the conditions in this race were really, really different. The mud was super thick, it was heavy, the ground was melting, there was a lot more running on this course, and that factored in and meant that some riders didn't really factor in. I mean, Lauren Zerner, I already mentioned it briefly, it was not her day. This is maybe not her preferred condition, but based on what I've seen from her, she should clearly be able to do better. Mia Asseltine was maybe quoted as a bit of disappointment, but she had a bad crash in Cincinnati and she had a concussion there and needed to recover quite a bit based on her performances in Europe. She raced in Antwerp and Hilversum. You could already know that this wasn't really going to go in her way. And then Musgrave and Brenneman, 4th and 5th, both second-year U23s, kind of where I would have expected them, I would say. What's your take on Musgrave's 4th place, Issam?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it could have been maybe a little bit better, but the performances were just not really there to cover that. And then you're going to try, obviously, when the day comes for the nationals, and going to give it everything. But I just feel that was kind of it. There was not much more to it, and that can also be part of the process, right? It's not always going to be an upwards trajectory. I think that she's still young. There's still time for her to improve. It was not a surprise that she just fell short of a podium. I was not able to deliver on the day, or at least not play a role for the podium places. So I think that in the end, it was not a big surprise, and for her it's probably the best to focus on the progress and try to make the best of that and just keep on going, because that's that's probably the most difficult part when it doesn't really go your way or you feel that it could have been better. You just need to make sure that you forget somewhat the negative thoughts and focus on the positives and on the positives during the progress as well. And I think that for her, the potential is there. There is some work that has to be done, and also in terms of how you're going into your season and how you're trying to get through the races, the training and all that. So I think that for her, there is potential and she can definitely do better. Work has to be done there, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's not quite as impressive as she was as a first-year U23, and then I'm mainly talking about how she came into previous season, right? Then she quite quickly made a name for herself with 5th places in the USCX series, beating Raylan Nuss, being up there with Lauren Zerner, and that hasn't really gotten a continuation. Last year she also had a bad crash where she sustained a concussion from, which went kind of unnoticed and kept lingering. So that's obviously quite annoying, and it's still not bad. And again, linear development doesn't exist. You've heard me say it many times. She can completely rebound from this. So I guess we'll just see what comes from it. And I wouldn't really worry. Her season has not been bad. I would say there's a positive line in her results, and that's the most important thing. We can move to the men's U23 race now. Patrick, fill us in on the details there.
Much like the U23 women's race, we saw some crossover riders here. coming from other disciplines to race cross at the national championships. So earlier in the week, we saw Ivan Sippy take the victory in the collegiate race. That raised some eyebrows because we don't really see him racing all that often on the cross field. And then with him on the start list in U23, it was a question of, does he repeat? Does he take a U23 championship when he hasn't really raced all that much cross this season? It was an interesting conundrum. It kind of reminded me of Chris Blevins back in 2017. Although that year we saw Blevins race an entire cross program at the U23 level, he really was a mountain biker at heart, and obviously he still is a mountain biker at heart. So these other riders coming in from other disciplines looking at cross is really interesting. In 2017, Blevins did take the national championship ahead of Lance Haydet. The question here was, would Sippy do the same thing? Would Sippy come into this race having not raced all that much at this discipline? Would he take the championship and then just go back to mountain bike? So ultimately it didn't work out that way. Henry Coote had an amazing ride. It was a group the first half of the race, and then coming into the second half of the race, we saw Coote come to the front. Once he was in the front, he started kind of working that gap. The gap was starting to grow. It started at 3 seconds. Then it was kind of up to 7 seconds. Then it was up to 10 seconds. And before you knew it, he had a pretty healthy gap that was pretty obvious if he didn't make a mistake, wasn't going to close. So that's been one of his struggles in the past. He's had a tendency to make an unforced error, and that could put him into trouble. This season, though, we see him not make those errors. He's been able to kind of have clean races. He won his first elite race here at Really Rad, and he was able to double up on that in the U23 race in his first year as a U23. So big race for Coote. Awesome result for him. Couldn't be more happy for the guy. One of the best finish line post-ups we've seen in a while. And yeah, I mean, it's really indicative of a strong progression from junior racing into U23 for him to step up, come off of that third place in last year's junior race, and then immediately win the U23 race against riders that are 4 years older than him.
So Henry Coote, if you're a loyal listener of this podcast, that name is not new to you. We've covered him many times, and as Patrick said, he's a rider who had a tendency of crashing a lot. He could not really deal with stress and pressure in the race, and that has completely changed. He is a completely different rider than 2 years ago. He's smoothened out. He's made big leaps in his development, Issam, and then he comes with that great post-up, great victory, bit of a showman. That's how I know Henry as well. And yeah, it was just great to see. He was kind of like almost cruising. I mean, I think I wrote that on our Instagram. I'm not sure how fair it is. Spranger and Sippy were quite close until the penultimate lap. But definitely Henry, like Coote in the first lap and second lap, he still made some mistakes. He also crashed once, a bit silly. But then he really settled in, and yeah, I'm going to stick with cruised. He had it in control.
He would definitely call it cruised. I think that it was as you said, he definitely had a development in that area of trying to stay cool and not make silly mistakes and not end up in first lap crashes or any of that mess that you have sometimes. That just really hurts your race in a way, and I think that's a great victory for him. It's a good boost for him as well in terms of his development. I think that it is a confirmation of the talent that he is. And yeah, I think that for him is now a case of making sure that this doesn't distract him from the fact that there is still some work that has to be done to get better and better. But I think that he takes it quite seriously, and he's very confident in himself as well and in the development. And I think that's also that can be a positive. That can also be a negative. But it's for sure, a great champion and someone that has great potential. But you got to work for that, and I think that he has the mentality to do that. So that will be interesting to see how he will develop. But he's a great champion there at the Men Under 23.
Let's listen to what he had to say after the race in an interview with Patrick.
I'm here with Henry Coote, U23 national champion. Henry, last year it was really, really wet, tornado in the afternoon, so way different conditions than today where it's dry. Which course do you like better?
Definitely this one. I like the aspect of you gotta be really patient on this course. Can't rush it, but when you gotta pedal, you gotta go really hard. And that worked really well for me because I was able to not overreact when I felt like I wasn't going as fast. And I was able to push the limits right after that. So I think this course suited me really well with the punchy efforts and then a little bit of recovery. It's kind of like 20-40 intervals.
Awesome. We see a lot of American riders start their season really early in September, peak kind of early, and then start fading into the winter. You did it differently this year. You won it really rad. Only raced a few times. Do you kind of give that cause for your success today?
Yeah, totally. I raced mountain bike world championships, so I took my off season. I came into Rochester without really any training. I raced well, but I knew I still had a lot more in me, and I was building. I still think I'm not even close to where I should be. Like for world championships, I think I'm still building towards that, and I feel really confident in my fitness.
Okay. Where are we going to see you next?
I will be racing in Europe next week at the World Cup.
Awesome. Congratulations, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So, Issam, two things here, or maybe three things I would still like to discuss about the men's U23 race. First, Henry Coote in the interview said he came into the season without really training, just carrying his mountain bike form over to Rochester, where he finished 4th on the first day. He wins here quite comfortably and says, my form is nowhere near where I want or need to be. It's a bit dunking on the opposition, like, look at me, but also, like, if that's true, where do you think his potential is in Europe? He's going to come over. Do you think this is a rider that has made so much progression, we're talking top 10 U23 World Cup, or is that too early?
That's got to be a bit difficult to judge. I think that he is. It's going to be interesting to see how much progression you're going to make, because it's sometimes the feeling and eventually what your body is going to do is two different things. I think that, of course, if you can have the feeling that you're not there yet, but sometimes the numbers say something else, and you're already somewhat on a very on a good level. So it's going to be interesting what he can do in Europe. I would say that I think that a top 10 is where he needs to aim for. I think that it could be doable on certain races, but it's a different ball game in Europe racing. It's definitely going to be a little bit more tricky. It's going to be obviously more going to be thrown at you, more elbows, more shoulders. You're not going to be the best there in the race, and that's obviously a way different. It's a different ball game. It's a different type of racing because you're not racing to win. You're racing to hold your position or try to get yourself within a top 5 or a top 10, and that's just a bit different. I think that a top 10 is definitely within his possibilities, and if he does that, he can be very happy with that and just build from that. I think the most important thing for him is if he goes to Europe, you need to just take every race as a learning curve and try to understand how the racing goes there, because that's the best thing you can do, and just improve every day. Learn from mistakes. Mistakes have to be made in a way to make yourself better and improve, and I think that is where the focus needs to be on. But it depends, but I think that a top 10 is definitely something that he should aim for, at least.
Aiming, yes, but I personally think that might be a bit too high for now, because just look at where his generations, like the other riders from his generation, the other first years U23 are. If you look, for instance, at the Dublin results, where a couple of riders were still missing, or even at the European Championships, okay, Sparfell got that podium there, but I would still rate Sparfell higher than Henry Coote, and I say that with the utmost respect for the development that Henry Coote has undergone. And in Dublin, you saw Sparfell didn't break into the top 10. Sola did, Remain was 10th, Del Grosso still needs to come in, etc. So I think he will be a good rider who is on the bubble of the top 10, which is really promising as a first year. And if he can keep up this development, who knows where his limit is. He is also a talented mountain biker. And the two riders behind him are also mountain bikers. They also go to the same school as he does, Colorado Mesa University, CMU. And I don't think we need to go into too much depth here, Issam, but Ivan Sipi, good rider, finishes second here. Jack Spranger, the defending champion, finishes third. it also showcases something, right? So these riders are mountain bikers. They kind of just come in here. They're not in the best form, but they're up there with the best U23s. And when they become an elite, they likely won't do much cross at all if they still do it. And they're already not doing that much cross. And to me, that showcases a problem that's not unique to American cyclocross and what we've covered already many times before, but it just showcases the difficulty cyclocross faces in retaining talent. The talents are out there. I think Jack Spranger could have made a fine U23 if he had prioritized cross. I think based on his junior results, he could have been a rider that as a third or fourth year could have been in contention for top 10 at the World Championships. But it's not his priority, and honestly, I can also understand it because there is just not that much money in cyclocross, especially if you're in the US, and that is something that will need to change. And hopefully, those rumors about Olympic cyclocross are true, because I think only then you can start turning the ship in countries like the US. Good, let's move on then to the junior races. Let's start with the men junior. Patrick, take it away.
My opinion of the junior racing today was that the results were not that surprising. We saw Garrett Bashore coming in as the Pan Am champion from that race in Missoula. He raced 4 of the 8 rounds of USCX, the first 2 at Go Cross. He got second in both events. And then at the last 2 rounds at Trek CX Cup in Madison, he got a second and then a first. So good results there. Not quite a surprise here that we see him on the top step of the podium. But the way that racing went, it could have gone either way between him and Ben Brovman. Brovman led quite a bit of the race. At one point with about 2.5 laps to go, he had a few second gap and then kind of washed out in a corner in the back hill area. That allowed Garrett Bashore to come back, and from there on, you kind of saw Bashore on the front foot, Brovman on the back foot, and it never really seemed like it was going to come back together at that point. The racing kind of progressed on. We saw Ben finish about 3 seconds behind the lead. It was a good result for him. It's definitely not what he was looking for, but I think there are good signs for him coming into the next round of the Junior World Cup.
It will be interesting to see how Bashore and Brovman go on the European courses in the World Cups this weekend. Brovman had a bad start in Dublin. I do think he is quite talented, but he just didn't really get it his way here at the Nationals or in Dublin. Both races he had a bad start. He reported some pedal issues in Louisville here. It looked maybe from the stream a bit that the pressure in his front tire was a bit too high on the course, which was still frozen when they raced. They raced at nearly at sunset, 8:30. That's not the normal hour for a cyclocross race to start. That could have definitely been a bit later with a shorter break between the juniors and U23, but it was a close battle, and for me, the point of difference was that Brovman was able to hop the barriers. He definitely gained significant time there compared to Bashore, who was running them. But ultimately, Brovman, who was gone at the front at some point, crashed and then needed to chase again and didn't really work out anymore for him. These two have been evenly matched all season. And then it's Bashore who gets the upper hand in the championships. But we'll see who gets the upper hand when the racing hits the European scene. I definitely see Brovman as technically better, but it were just a couple of mistakes too many. And what I just mentioned about Coote, like if you can flatten that out, it helps you a lot. So I know that's something he's been working on, but it was a quite good battle with also Dylan Haynes up there quite long. But Aidan Volmuth, he finished 7th, and that was due to a crash on the barriers. Patrick, what did you think about his ride?
The ride of the day here for me came from Aidan Volmuth. Aidan was leading through much of the first lap, but then coming into the barriers, he suffered a mechanical issue that ultimately set him back and left him running to the pits. That's quite a long run from the barriers to pit 1, so he lost a vast majority of time in that period. He really rallied, though, through the rest of the race and found himself making back time, making back positions, and really gaining back on the leaders. At one point, you could hear the commentators say at the course that he was in kind of catching ground of the lead group, which is pretty crazy considering that he was minutes behind coming out of that first lap. Ultimately, Aidan finished 7th at 1:45 back. I don't know his lap times, but he had to have been running the fastest laps of the day in that field. That was a really, really great effort from him. obviously not the result that he was looking for, but it's a result that he should be really proud of. It takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of resilience to suffer a mechanical that early in the race and continue on. I mean, he fought through the rest of that. He fought through 35 minutes of having to claw back and not be where he should have been in that race. And for that, I mean, he should be proud of himself, and that was a really good showing.
Yeah, so very unfortunate for Volmuth. It was unlucky, I would say, here. So in the first lap, he leads over the barriers. As he puts his bike down, ready to remount, Beshore accidentally kicks into the rear wheel of Volmuth, causing it to bump up. Volmuth jumps, but his bike isn't there. He falls. Then Beshore is tangled up in the bike and stamps on some spokes and the frame by accident. So that was all very unfortunate, and that's something I didn't mention just now. Beshore also needed to chase a bit after that. It had its dynamics, and the course was also very, very different. As said, it was frozen, it was a racetrack, and that's something that made the dynamics different from the U23 races when it was a lot more muddy. So interesting, we'll see how they do. Volmuth put in some decent lap times. They were not necessarily the fastest. He was roughly on pace with the front runners, but nothing more than that. Then let's go to the junior women, the final race. Patrick, clear favorite there, right?
You could say that the winner of the men's junior race was the favorite, and that would be somewhat debatable. I think there are a few people out there that would pick different people, and Garrett wouldn't necessarily be the number one choice for everybody. But the alternative to that here is the women's junior race. I think nearly everybody would tell you that Lydia Cusack here was the favorite. She's coming off a win in Dublin at the World Cup. That was a pretty decisive win. There was really no doubt in the second half of that race that she would pull through. She was kind of moving away from her competitors there and made a pretty solid showing and a solid declaration that she was here and she was going to be a strong contender in that World Cup and also in the States. So the fact that Lydia won the women's junior race, not particularly surprising. Big gaps here, really wasn't all that close together. Out by the second half of the race, we knew she was going to win, and then it was just a matter of her having to ride it to the finish and consolidate that victory. Ultimately, it was a 44-second victory over Alyssa Sarkisov. It'll be interesting to see what Cusack does here in the winter months, going into kind of the Christmas period and then into the Worlds block. I think we could see some really big things from her. Whether or not she can keep her form up and keep at a peak is kind of a question. We've seen a lot of American riders peak early and then kind of fade into the winter months. She does have the advantage, though, of racing the Junior World Cup block before, so this isn't her first time out there. She has European experience, and there's a good chance here we see some good results from Lydia coming forward, and it'll be interesting to see in the next few weeks, in the next 2 months, what she can do out there on the crossfield.
So, Issam, final remarks here then on the woman junior, Cusack taking the win. Don't think that's super surprising. I am still curious to see what Sarkisov can do. Sarkisov went out on Griffo tires, which was the wrong choice. She crashed in some side-by-side action in, I think, the second or third corner. I could just about see it in the corner of the screen. And from there on, her race was over because Cusack was at the front and was gone. So, yeah, I'm curious to see what are your expectations. We'll go over it a bit more this weekend or in the midweek for this weekend, but what were your takeaways from this race, if any, and what do you expect? Do you expect Cusack to be the outright favorite for all the remaining World Cups? Do you think Sarkisov can challenge her? Do you think that maybe they'll have a harder time on the courses we're getting now?
A harder time, I wouldn't say, but I definitely think that it's definitely going to be a challenge. It's just also a different build-up towards eventually the Worlds, which is also going to play somewhat of a role. I think for Lydia, it's just going to be a matter of trying to maintain the form that she has right now, because it works out and it looks quite good. The form is there. It's she has been somewhat consistent, and it's gonna be interesting to see if the next couple of rounds of the World Cup, Hull, Zonhoven, Besançon, it's a different ball game. Different type of racing in a way as well. I mean, if you compare Hulst to Zonhoven and then Besançon, that's 3 totally different courses in a way. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think it's also going to be good for the development and all that. So yeah, for Lydia, it's those races. I think 1 or 2, Hulst and Zonhoven, are going to tell a little bit more in terms of where she stands and if it's something that she can continue to do, fight for victory. But no doubt she's definitely going to be one that is up there for the fight, and it's just going to be interesting to follow that progression and how it will be ending up in terms of world championships, because there are going to be some that will have the focus on that in the later part of the season, so that will be interesting to watch.
I mean, it will be everyone's focus now, right? Especially in the junior categories, that's almost all that counts. It's just the championships. Everyone wants that rainbow jersey. And in the Dublin podcast where they went over that's also the main goal for Cusack this season. So we'll see. I look forward to the racing. Patrick, any closing remarks from Louisville?
That's a wrap for the 2024 United States National Championships from Louisville. All in all, a pretty good race. So the prevailing wisdom was that this was going to be the course this year that was going to bridge the gap between that 2018 fiasco and the 2023 course that lacked any kind of decisive feature at all. And I think it kind of played out. I mean, there was nothing out here that was particularly technical. It wasn't hard, I don't think. I don't think anybody out there today would say that the course was difficult. I think a lot would tell you, though, that it was fair, that it had opportunities to attack, that it didn't leave you kind of in a constant state, that there were, you were climbing, you were doing a lot of turns, you were on the bike, you were off the bike. So I think it was pretty good in that regard. It'll be good, though, in the future to move on to different venues. So after 2 years in Louisville, next year we'll be going to Fayetteville for the 2025, I guess, national championships. Fayetteville is a course that has been on the world calendar here a lot in the past few years. So in 2022, we saw it host a world championships. The preceding 2 seasons, we saw it host World Cups. It's a course that is a world's level course. It's more European, I'd say, in its nature. I think American courses tend to have a lot of turns, less flow, where a European course kind of has, longer straights, more decisive features, that kind of thing. So I think Fayetteville will give us a view into that, being that it hosted a Worlds and it hosted a World Cup. It'll be interesting to see a new venue too, right? We haven't seen this as a venue for a national championship, so trying it out as a national championship venue will be really nice. It'll be nice to go to a new place. USA Cycling's kind of had a rotation here the last few years where they visit the same venues somewhat repeatedly. So add in a new venue. That'll be great. Hopefully we can grow the sport a little bit. Fayetteville is a very popular cycling destination, so it'll be an interesting question of whether or not the event will attract non-endemic cyclocross fans to the race. Louisville, frankly, didn't have many, if at all, if any, fans that weren't there because they knew somebody or because they were a parent of a rider. I don't think anybody walked in off the street that didn't know what cyclocross was to see that race. It was very clear that there were only people associated with cyclocross in some way at that event. Hopefully Fayetteville can draw somebody else in. I mean, it is an outdoors mecca. It is a mountain bike destination, and hopefully we can make it a cyclocross destination as well.
Well, then I think that will be it for this special episode of the Cyclocross Social podcast. Issam, thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And Patrick, thank you for being here as well.
That's it for me from Louisville. Thanks for having me, Noah, and hopefully you can get me back on the podcast for the coming Christmas block. It's not just for the racers anymore. It's also for the podcasters and the photographers too.
Then that will be a wrap. Thanks everyone for listening. And you can also check out the podcast for Namur, which will be uploaded right after this one. And we will be back this week for a special midweek episode. Thanks for listening and goodbye.